Hello and welcome. I am Ben the Best 5 and I'm coming at you with even more Kerbal Space Program content. Now this week I have in fact done my content a little bit differently because I've in fact used a different editor this time, so hopefully my video should in fact come out in a much higher definition. I am also now recording my voiceover after I have recorded it. That's right, previous weeks I had in fact just recorded the voice and the video together, but now I'm in fact selecting only the parts that I want, and now I'm doing it afterwards. So yes, those are just a few things, so my video should be now higher quality, and hopefully the voiceover should be a bit better. Now anyway, about the mission which has already performed its takeoff while I was busy introducing myself. This is a fairly standard contract mission you'll get partway through your playthrough, and here we are in fact going to Eve orbit. Now I was considering perhaps just skipping over this because I have already done an Eve flyby in this save and it's kind of a similar sort of thing. However, it wasn't particularly good, so in this mission here we will in fact be going to Eve, and I've cut it down, and I have it's cut down, it's going to be faster, it's going to be higher quality, so that's why I'm doing a second mission which is relatively similar. And in the long run it turned out not to actually be all that similar because, well, you'll see why later. Basically, it required a bit more fuel than, say, just doing a flyby, so I had to do some fuel saving maneuvers, which are kind of good and kind of a good thing to know how to do. Did mean the mission took like 5 years, but they're Kerbals, they love space, their capture's big enough, so that's not too big of an issue. And yeah, the rocket I am using for this is in fact the same rocket which I used for the flyby because we could perform some quite excessive maneuvers and be fine. So as a result, I will in fact be recovering both of my upper stage and my lower stage, which is fairly standard, particularly across my channel because I have been doing booster recoveries for a long time. It's kind of the staple of my channel, plus it does really help your playthroughs if you are recovering boosters because it cuts down costs a lot. Yes, and cutting down costs by recovering them. I know I've said this a few times in basically every single one of my videos, but it gives me back easily 70% of the value of the entire craft, which is why I do them. Also coming up in a minute, you'll start to see my recovery of my upper stage. In my previous ones where I have attempted an upper stage recovery, I have managed to get the stage back, however it didn't land quite exactly where I wanted it to, or it ended up landing, well, they didn't land where I wanted them to land, and the re-entries were a bit hectic, and we started, burning up and facing the wrong direction, and bits that weren't supposed to be exposed to heat necessarily were being exposed to heat, and that's not good. However, this time, I in fact made sure that I had the correct amount of reaction wheels and stuff on board so that I could successfully deorbit. However, there must be something bugged out about the Wolfhound engine because when I was deorbiting with the burns, it would burn in the direction it was meant to burn in, and then suddenly the engine would cause it to flip around while I was burning, so that definitely did make it a bit more difficult. However, the reaction wheels were able to, because I had 4 of them, they were able to quite rapidly orient my craft in the correct direction, and they were able to hold my craft steady throughout the entirety of our fiery re-entry down to the shores of Kerbin. Now I would have, if possible, liked the stage to have landed a little bit closer to the Kerbal Space Center than where it ends up landing. It ends up landing, I have a second monitor, so that was just the second monitor being a bit glitchy because I only just installed it and I haven't worked it all out. Anyway, but yes, where was I? That's right. I was so I landed it just past the island runway. Well, about 20 kilometers past the island runway, and I would have ideally wanted it to get a bit closer. And but that it didn't happen because the engine was ruining the orientation throughout the entirety of my landing, which was definitely not the greatest of things. But oh well, it is what it is. Yeah, I might consider swapping out that engine for a different engine. However, the problem is if you have an engine like the Poodle in there, for example, it's definitely a vacuum optimized engine. However, it doesn't have the necessary thrust to send something into a nice equatorial orbit before you can recover the lower stage, because because it has less thrust, the lower stage tends to have actually burned up before you've managed to circularize with it. So that's why I've opted for the Wolfhound engine. And the Wolfhound engine actually it has less delta V, but only a small amount less. So that's why I'm not particularly concerned about using it. Like, it's only a couple hundred delta V, and once it's circularized and has enough fuel to decircularize, it doesn't matter how much extra it has. So yeah, that's why I'm using the Wolfhound. But yeah, if it keeps on glitching like that, maybe I'll find a different engine. I'm not particularly sure. Anyway, yeah, that's the recoveries for this mission. And now I'm going to create a maneuver node to get us on an encounter with Eve. Now, as you can see, we are not actually at an ideal Eve encounter, which means that our maneuver node we create here, it's not going to get us close to Eve. Like, I'm going to play around with it in a little bit to try and get as close to Eve as we possibly can. However, we're not going to get anywhere near satisfactorily close without spending a ton of delta V, so I did quite rapidly give up on this endeavor and decided to simply just wait until we were at an Eve transfer window. At that point, I just created a maneuver node, and well, actually I created two, and I'll explain that later in more detail when I'm doing it. And yeah, I waited for, because it's got solar panels, and fuel in this game, unlike real life, doesn't boil off, so we can just leave our craft up in orbit for like a month or three while we wait for Eve to fly around to the correct position to encounter it nicely, as we are doing here. Uh, I should have cut the time warping out in the video, but oh well, I forgot. I'll try and remember next time to do that. Again, this is the first time I've done a video this way, but it's hopefully going to be better quality because I am using a better quality editor than the one I previously used, although I did make a mistake when I exported the file from my recording software, so I had to convert it, and I'm pretty sure it took it from 1080p to like half, so to like, I don't know, 540 or something, and there wasn't much I could do about that. So the quality might be bad, but at least the frames per second should have been preserved, so it should at least still be displaying at quite a nice speed, so it shouldn't be an issue. Anyway, here I am creating a maneuver node to kind of get as close to Eve as we can. Then at the descending node here, I'm going to create another maneuver node, which, well, it's going to be dependent on the result of the previous maneuver node, so it's always going to be rough, but that's going to get my precise encounter. So once I've kind of gotten near to it with my near to an encounter with my initial burn, I'm going to perform a second burn at the ascending node around Eve. There are two reasons for doing this. It is more efficient just to do your burn around, well, further out from an object, so to change your inclination it's better to do that while you're busy orbiting the sun and you're not orbiting Kerbin. It's better to do it then, although ideally you want to take off at the correct inclination, but for this one we just took off at an equatorial orbit because that's going to be close enough to Eve's inclination. However, so that's not too much of this. That's the first reason, is because it's more efficient. And the second reason that we will be doing our burn there is because although an inclination burn is going to be the main change we have to perform to get into an Eve encounter, there are other things we will need to do just to bring ourselves a little bit closer into Eve. So as a result of that, I am doing it around the sun because that makes them more precise and easier to get an encounter from. Because trying to get precise things like that from Kerbin, although it is slightly more efficient, uh, you turn your craft half a degree and suddenly it's gone, sort of thing. Like, it's ridiculously fiddly. And I, yes, can't manage with that. So we are in fact going to be doing it along with um, our ascending node inclination change. And also a small thing I would like to point out is that changing your inclination and doing other burns like prograde, retrograde, etc. It does make it more efficient. Anyway, here I am correcting my maneuver because our first burn, it was very, very close to our planned maneuver node burn, but wasn't perfect, which means that as a result, our second one will be off because it calculates it keeps the amount that you burn the same, not the result the same. So if my orbit is a little bit different, then my different burns will in fact give me a slightly different result, which is why I had to perform an adjustment like that. Also, I did cut out all the time warping to my burns and stuff. And see what I mean about, like, even like from somewhere like the sun, a maneuver is very difficult to match perfectly, but using 5% throttle by pressing shift, I was able to do that. And here we are getting a maneuver node to get into orbit of Eve. Now, because our mission is simply to orbit, I'm putting ourselves into basically as tight or as bad of an orbit as we can get to while staying within its orbit. And by doing that, it reduces the amount of delta V it will take to get us into orbit of Eve, and it will also reduce the amount of delta V we have to spend to get out of Eve orbit. And we are doing this simply because at this stage we have used up the majority of our delta V, so we will be trying to conserve fuel as much as possible by doing things like completing the contract as loosely as possible. Anyway, we are going to be in orbit around Eve very shortly, right here, which means that it is in fact time to do some science. Now, there are two reasons I went for kind of like a low periapsis around Eve. The first reason is because it puts us in the space near Eve biome, which is a biome we had not previously been to, which means we can collect a new set of science. And the second is because coming into an object close like that, in fact, it gives you a bit of a small gravity assist, which means that the amount of, well, increases the gravity assist that you would receive from the planet, which means that it takes less delta V to circularize than if you were further away. And now our scientist is in fact just collecting the data as we speak. I figured, have a scientist doing some science stuff while I talked about rocket science, but I'll briefly just mention that he's in fact collecting all of the science from the science bay there, because that science bay will be destroyed when we re-enter. So anyway, here we are performing just a quick burn at our periapsis to, our periapsis to escape Eve's sphere of influence and put us in orbit of the sun so that we can return to Kerbin. Now here we had a bit of an issue where we were drastically low on fuel and we couldn't even do something like, say, an inclination change to get to the correct plane as Kerbin, because that would have cost more fuel than we have available in our stage. So instead what I did was I created a maneuver node at Kerbin, at our sun, at our node to Kerbin, which at this point, because the point at where the node is where the two orbits cross, which means that if you do create a burnout, even if they're like off at like 90 degrees, they will still collide into each other, and well, their orbits will pass, and you can get to that object by performing just a standard retrograde or prograde burn by doing that. So yes, I had to wait a few orbits till I got to a point where Kerbin would pass by our the point where the orbits would match, but when it did, I could perform our burn and in fact bring ourselves onto a Kerbin collision course, which is exactly what we want so that we can bring our Kerbals home. And here I've just skipped our time warp, and here we are still colliding into Kerbin on the exact same trajectory we were on beforehand, and we're going to hit the atmosphere in our pod. Now, the good thing for us is that heat shields, they can take a lot. They can withstand extreme heating as we are seeing here. I'm going through a lot of ablator, but that's fine. And yeah, we can survive that because we're only coming from Eve at high speed, so we can let Kerbin's atmosphere slow us down and deploy some parachutes and lower our Kerbal safely down to the ground. And actually, we didn't land too far away from the Kerbal Space Center. However, that was completely luck, you know, because to precisely hit an exact point like that from space that far out, you're not going to be able to predict it, especially since like Kerbin will have rotated a few hundred times by the time you're actually hitting it from where your maneuver was, and you can't see where it was going to be. Anyway, we have landed and we are recovering our Kerbals. Whoops, I meant to cut out that loading screen. Now you can see how slow my computer actually is. And we can see the massive slew, I guess you'd call it, of science that we have recovered from this mission and our Kerbals, and we've leveled one up. So yes, anyway, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please do leave a like. If you'd like to see more, then please subscribe or leave a comment if you would like to interact with me. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I hope that you have a good day.